Welcome, everybody, to the Table Rush Talk Show, where we dive deep into the world of entrepreneurship, marketing, and personal growth. I'm your host, Mischa Zvegintzov, and today I have an inspiring guest with us, Patti Hunt, host of the top-rated RV Life podcast. Patti has spent the last 3 years exploring life on the road, building a thriving podcast community from scratch, and managing it all with resilience even through life's toughest challenges. Today, she'll share her insights on building a successful podcast, embracing life's adventures, and finding strength to move forward no matter what. Let's dive in. Patti, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Indeed, super glad to have you here. So quick, you have the RV Life podcast, which is a top 3% podcast worldwide. You've got advertisers who are paying you to place spots. You've got a good listenership. You've got an engaged listenership. Tell us how you got here, or yeah, give us the picture. How does one end up with the RV Life podcast?
I'm going to say sort of by accident, actually. So yeah, going back 3 years, my husband said, let's sell everything, buy an RV and go on the road. And I thought he was crazy. I thought he was kidding. And we did that. And we started a YouTube channel. And a little over a year in, so we had a YouTube channel or have a YouTube channel. A little over a year in, he said, let's start a podcast. And again, I thought he was nuts. I didn't want to take one more thing on. And RV Life came to us and said, hey, we want a podcast host and you guys would be great. And so I jumped in with both feet. I had no idea what to expect. And I think the answer and the thing that I would recommend is making sure whatever you're doing, you truly love. So I just jumped in. I was excited. I loved the people I was interviewing, the people I met, the topics we were talking about, and just had fun with it and enjoyed it. And I'm loving it to this day. So I think that's the secret.
Amazing. So this leads to two questions. A, how did RV Magazine Life find you?
So RV Life, which is RV Life Pro, it's a suite of products for us RVers. We had connected with Patrick Buchanan, who is the director of partnership, and we truly made a connection with him. He's, just an authentic, amazing person. We were speaking for RV Life, so we would go to events and speak for them. And so we were already connected to him. And that's when the podcast opportunity came up, and he said, you guys are the people for the job. So that's how that happened.
Amazing. And so when you started your RV life and going out on the road 3 years ago with your husband, and you start this YouTube channel, were there any goals to monetize, or was it purely just, hey, this will be fun, we've got an RV, let's do this YouTube channel?
So being totally honest, which is what I like to do, when we got out on the road, we had spent 3 months planning. It was during COVID. My husband had been in the entertainment industry literally his entire life. And he was actually ready to do a show for the casinos, for Bally's. He had a magic show he was producing and directing. And so money was quickly going out the door and no money coming in. And when we did decide to get on the road, we didn't have the best financial plan. So starting a YouTube channel, the end game was, sure, we hoped it made money. But the whole idea and inspiration for us was we wanted to inspire people to fully live life, especially during COVID. There was, I don't have to tell anybody what it was like. But even during COVID, we were living in Las Vegas. There were things to do. And that's what we were looking to really inspire people, get out and live life fully. And that's why the YouTube channel was started. At the end of the day, is the hope you're going to monetize? Absolutely. But for anybody thinking, hey, let's just jump in and it's going to be a money thing, it's a tough road. It's tough starting a YouTube channel and making money at it. I think the starting it isn't so difficult. Do it, love what you're doing, you know, do what makes you happy. And then I think you'll find your people. So that's how that started.
Amazing. So talk me through this. So you start this YouTube channel. Okay. I think we've had a couple of conversations before this podcast. And so maybe you had told me this already and I just hadn't made note or I forgot. But your husband was relatively successful. You perhaps were you working at the time too, but he's producing shows. Yes? Is what's
Yes.
going on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you are thinking, let's go RVing, and your husband, I've forgotten his name now,
Dan.
Dan, and Dan can produce these shows on the road. We've got the internet. We can effectively work on the road.
That's exactly what it was. And, he had been a producer, director. He worked on major movies, behind the scenes, on camera. So he had the whole, being able to edit the videos we were doing, knowing how to create video content in a way that didn't take 20 hours a week to edit. So there was a lot of things because of his skill set that worked really well. But yes, I mean, over his time, he had been very successful in the industry. But again, COVID hit and the industry was totally shut down. So
Man, so you
tough
have
time.
committed to going on the road. You've got this RV. You've kind of planned a little bit. So you're caught off guard by COVID. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Oh, absolutely. I think like everybody else, we were totally caught off like it was a total shock. And again, we were in Las Vegas and week after week, month after month, and the entire strip was shut down. The Las Vegas strip was really shut down and it had never been in its history. As a matter of fact, when you drove down the strip, because you could drive down, they had to actually have guards and they had chains on the doors because the doors never locked. So they didn't have locks. And so, yeah, so, I'm originally from the Philadelphia area and it's a whole different environment during COVID, I'm sure. But it was definitely threw us off guard, definitely one of those wake up call type moments. I'm gonna say, it was go continue down, and we were on lockdown like a lot of people. Stay locked down, stay where you are, still having to pay bills or do something else. And it was because there wasn't a whole lot of choice that I finally said, sure, let's go on the road. What do I have to lose? That was kind of my answer.
So do you sell a house or things like that, or are you renting at the time? Or
We had a house in Pennsylvania we sold. We were renting in Las Vegas. We got rid of just about everything, literally sold everything and hit the road, put everything in the RV and got on the road. That was,
and let's
yeah.
start a YouTube channel. Oh, go
And
ahead.
let's
No,
start.
what were you going to
And,
say?
and, and so I had been in an RV for 7 total nights to this point. So it wasn't like I had RV experience, camping experience. There was little to no experience at all. So that was, yeah, a big part of
Oh my
it. Like,
God.
yes. And then actually, before we went on the road, while he was trying to convince me that this was a good idea and let's start the YouTube channel, we were doing videos in the area, in the Las Vegas area. There's a lot to do there other than being on the strip. Things that in the 3 years I lived there, I didn't know. So we were doing video and we come home one night and we had somebody that was staying with us and a friend of hers was there and he said, hey, what are you guys doing? And Dad was like, oh, we just, shot some videos. And he said, show me. And usually Dan would never show somebody raw footage. For whatever reason, he showed this guy. He was an executive for the CW network. and then asked us to do 4 episodes for the CW, which is on the YouTube channel. So we did 4 episodes for the CW, just showing people what there was to do. And I'll tell you, we had an amazing time. And the hope was to inspire people that there were things to do, even during COVID, go out, live life. And again, that was the messaging. And so that was a cool start to our video, to our YouTube
Yeah.
channel.
And did you get paid? You and Dan get paid to do that by CW?
Some. It wasn't a big payment, but they paid some.
Some
Nothing big, but the experience of it. And we got to do things, and I'll be honest, because we were doing the video for the YouTube channel, everywhere we went and everything we did, people had us come in. Like, we did a helicopter ride over the Grand Canyon. That's on there. And
Yeah.
so, everybody was more than willing to have us come in and create content and
Yeah.
not charge. So it
Yeah,
was
comping you.
really yes. It was
Yeah, of
really
course
nice.
and you're meeting amazing people and entrepreneurs and all sorts of people up and down the customer service line, right? From the booking person to the at the helicopter place to the owner, I'm sure.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so you start this new YouTube channel. Is it the same name as it is now when you started it?
No, it's actually called Exploring Through Our Lens.
Okay.
And the story behind that, over a year and a half ago, my mother had become ill. Living on the road was great because I had the opportunity to stay with her while she was in hospice for 6 months. And it was at that time that trying to do the YouTube channel and the podcast became too much. I was staying with her in Virginia, my brothers, and we just decided not to try and do video content. And so there hasn't been content put up in probably a year and a half. It is still getting views and subscribers, and it's monetized, nothing to write home about, but it is monetized. So it's interesting that it's still there, and I'm kind of deciding now whether to stay with that. I'm thinking about starting a new YouTube channel just because it's just me now.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to dive into that part of the story because it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, but inspiring at the same time. I'm interested in your experience with the YouTube channel out of the gate, and maybe tell me what your plan was and how it did or did not happen. Meaning, did Dan say, "All right, we're going to start this YouTube channel. We'll create this content. By this time, we'll have this many followers, and at this point, we'll start monetizing like this," or was it more by the seat of your pants?
Well, and that was the interesting part of it. Having been in the industry, he had he wanted this many subscribers by a certain time. We did videos regularly. So every week we put out a video because, quote unquote, the experts say that's what you need to do. So we sort of lived in this box that was rather stressful, trying to get the YouTube channel up, making sure the subscribers, checking those numbers on a daily basis. And after a while of that, I was just like, that's just too much for me. It was too much stress. It was too much pressure. I wanted to go out and have fun and enjoy what I was doing. If we went to an area and we were doing a video that didn't resonate, I didn't want to do it, and we didn't. So it morphed into, it was very stressful at first. It was I got to have so many subscribers. We've got to make sure we have views. We have to. And then I just got to a point, I'm like, this isn't fun anymore. The whole reason for getting on the road and changing our life, for anybody changing our life, was I want to enjoy life. It's just, I want to enjoy it. And so that kind of eased up. And even Dan was able to ease up. Being in the industry that he's in, he worked on movies like The Sixth Sense. There's all about numbers, viewership, all that stuff that, you're talking about multi-million-dollar projects. There are people looking at those things every minute of every day. And so I didn't want that. And so gradually we just stopped and started to enjoy, found other ways to bring money in. Having a YouTube channel in the beginning was not going to put the food on the table and pay the bills. So we found other ways to bring money in and make it work.
Amazing. Do you mind diving into a little bit of the finding other ways to make money? And I guess I have a couple of questions here. It's interesting, you know, somebody goes to Mexico City on vacation. They're on vacation. They love it. It's amazing. They buy a second home, right? And then the realities of having a second home, or well, it's really just because I was away from my main residence that I loved Mexico City, or I had a great
Right.
dinner or whatever, and now I've got a second home. I jumped in way too quick, for example. And then the even more extreme part of that would be somebody sends you a flyer. I get a flyer in the mail and it's like, get a second home in Mexico. And you're like, heck with it. I'm going to buy a second home in Mexico. Let's do it.
Correct.
And then you go to the second home, and it's almost what you did. It sounds like with me with RVing, where you're like, yeah, sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Right. And so there was no fallback plan. I mean, we had family, and in worst case scenario, we could have, gotten an apartment. I think because of what was happening with COVID, I think, the whole idea of, so backtrack 10 years before this happened, Dan had gotten ill and almost died. And so it was then that we said, life's too short. You have to live life fully. People say that all the time, and it's just words that they say. We really tried to live it. I have been a teacher for 20 years. I had have a master's plus 45 credits, and decided I was going to quit my job because I wasn't happy. And when Dan got ill, it was like, I'm not happy. I'm not living life to the fullest. Nobody knows when your last day is going to be. And how can we live a full life? And so when COVID hit, I think it was a message for a lot of people. I know there was a lot of horrible stories. A lot of people didn't make it. And I know that. And I think also the silver lining, what came out of it, were people saying, I'm tired of my 9-to-5 job. I'm tired of living this rat race. I'm tired of not seeing my kids. A lot of people changed what they did. And I think at that point, me saying, why not? Let me go in an RV. We've been in tough situations before. We make it work. And if I hate it, we'll figure it out. So I jumped in with both feet and said, let's do it. And then once we got on the road, we figured out ways to make money. I knew the YouTube channel wasn't going to quickly be the main source of income. And so when we connected with Patrick from RV Life, Dan and I had been speakers for a long time. So we would go to events and speak for RV Life. We had affiliate type programs. So, we would talk about products or services that we truly loved. We would create video around them, and people paid us for them, or we got paid for, selling a product or service. And my whole thing was, I had to not only love the product or service, but truly be happy, connected, feel that the person running that company was authentic. That was the biggest thing for me. Like, these were good companies. And along the way, there were companies and people that reached out to us that we passed on because it wasn't a fit, was not a good fit, whether it was the product or service or the personality of the people involved. We passed on some things. So, yeah, I mean, were there tough times in that 3 years? Yeah, there were some tough times in it.
What an awesome story. And two things jumped out at me to almost force your hand. Oh, there's the balloons.
Balloon.
Two things jumped out at me that forced your hand. First, Dan gets sick. So you start thinking, and Dan obviously starts thinking as well, are we living life to the fullest? Are we checking off those bucket list things? Are we moving to the heart, or are we beholden to things that we shouldn't be beholden to?
So,
COVID just amplified that even more. Yeah. And so,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
And that overall was always the messaging. How in everything we did, how can that message be put out there that don't wait until something happens to decide to live life fully. I interview people on my podcast all the time, and I want to hear their stories. And every person has a story of my parents passed, my somebody got ill, all of these stories that led them to say, no more, I need to live life fully. And my goal is to get people to see that and do that before something tragic happens.
Good. And there's so much to take away from that. I mean, you know, yeah, if you're inspired, go do the RV life before it's too late. And then let's take that even broader. Maybe it's not the RV life, maybe it's something else.
Right. Do what works for you. Well, I talk to RVers. I have a lot of people that are my listeners now that'll say, um, we're just, sorry, trying to shut that up. We're
Yeah.
just, you know, looking to take a weekend trip with the kids. We're looking to, it's not always about getting in an RV. It's not for everybody. I'm not trying to convince anybody to go full time in an RV and think that's the end all be all for everybody. It's not. But do what makes you happy. Do what makes you happy, and that's the important thing.
That's great. And I like how you just notched it down too. It's like, do what you love. We all have this idea, or I can myopically or look at that or put it in a tiny little bubble of that means I need to change my whole life and sell everything and go to the Himalayas and climb Mount Everest. But you really just brought it back down to reality and said, no, maybe it's go on a trip with your kids, or maybe
Right.
it's go on a trip with your parents. Like, do those things that we know we'll regret that we didn't do before it's too late, even if they're tiny things.
Absolutely. And you and I, that's a buzzword. You and I, when we first connected, I went on and I picked one of your episodes, and it was with Gregory Benedict, and he talked about regret. And he mentioned the book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, which I read while I was with my mom. My mom was 87 years old. She got to see 5 grandkids, 9 great grandkids. She got to see 4 of them get married. Like, lived what a lot of people think is a pretty full life, but she regretted not getting out and doing things. She regretted staying in her Philadelphia area and never going out of her comfort zone. And we had the opportunity to talk about those things of not having regrets. And that was very, something that I resonated when I heard that episode that you did, because that's what I'm hoping people will see in the live life fully, so you don't have those regrets when you're on your deathbed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. Everybody watching, listening, you can go to RV Life Podcast. You can simply Google RV Life Podcast and your website will jump up. You can also go into Apple or Spotify or your favorite podcast player and simply put in RV Life Podcast and the podcast will come up. And you're getting great stories. And boy, I was on there. Thank you for having me on there. That was a ton of fun. We got to talk about starting to create content while you're on the road, becoming a content creator, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was a great episode. It was a long episode because there was so much information, and I think we still weren't done. We could have done
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. And podcasting is such a great medium. And we're going to get to how you've grown your podcast, how you've monetized your podcast. You're doing some really cool things with your podcast. Everybody watching, listening, just know that we're going to learn some great stuff about podcasting, about having a podcast, starting a podcast, how to perhaps get some advertisers. And again, you do really creative stuff on your interviews, how you promote, how you weave in other episodes, things like that. It's so much good stuff is coming in that regard. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about the RV life because you were on the road for 3 years and what your producer, what's his name again?
Jacob. Jacob
Jake.
Gooden.
Yeah, Jacob's a young guy, younger than us, right?
Yes,
Maybe
he's
late 20s, early 30s, something like
late
that.
20s he is. He's a young guy, yeah.
Yeah, you've inspired him now. He's like, I think I want to get a van or a
Mhm.
RV and go on the road. And then there was that person that either you interviewed or one of your listeners who I think was a like loves camera and
Yep,
photography. And she's like, hey, I think she's young-ish in her
Brittany,
young
yeah.
30s, and you've inspired her. She's like, hey, I think I want to get an RV and go on the road and take pictures and things. My son, who's 21, he's like, I think I want to get a van. So before he even knew this was going on, he's already talking about, I want to go on the road. So I think it's in a lot of people's minds, especially after COVID, subconsciously, even people have this idea of the RV life or the road life or the van life or you know, there's those sort of in between the van and the RV, like the sprinter vans,
Right,
like
right.
that. There's been the proliferation of sprinter vans, so people are obviously of all ages and shapes and sizes are thinking about what you have done. So talk to me. 3 years experience, like highs and lows. What?
There's it's a lot of learning. Brittany and I, who you were referring to, she's a documentary photographer, just an amazing young woman. She's younger than us, married with 3 young boys, and she wants to get out on the road. She wants to give them a full life. She wants for her husband and her not to be doing quote unquote jobs. She wants to be able to just really experience and live life. And she had reached out to me. She said, I heard your podcast. I just love what you do. You're such an inspiration. And I got on the phone with her. RV life, lots of ups and downs. It is a whole different learning experience, learning to dump the tanks, learning to. So, my big thing, just being totally honest, when I started in the RV, the one thing I absolutely had to have, other than my king size bed, was my espresso machine. So, I have a cappuccino every morning. And anybody who listens to my podcast knows about my addiction. And so, it's learning if the air conditioner's on and I'm plugged into 30 amp power, can I run the air conditioner and the espresso machine at the same time? And sometimes learning the hard way by blowing the fuse. Um, but there's a lot of ups and downs. It's a whole different way of life. And I've done episodes where it's embracing that. It's embracing the unknown, the the what's different. I was the kind of person that I went to school, I became a teacher, I was going to retire at 65 and then live my life. So I had everything planned out. Planning was kind of my thing. When I'm thinking about, something that I'm not sure of, my question always is, what is this going to look like? And so I've had to learn to embrace that I might not know what it's going to look like. I'm going to learn as I go. I'm going to embrace change. I'm going to embrace the difficulties because there are the challenges. And I've had to learn that a lot, like really being okay with the challenges in life. And I think that helped in my living my RV life. And, yeah, I'd look at all the ups and downs of it and I wouldn't change it for the world. And thinking about what's next with getting back on the road for me.
Yeah. And so you are not on the road currently, but you want to get back on the road, yes?
And I'm keeping open to my whole thing that I always say is what else is possible. And that means I might not be able to see those possibilities. So I'm leaving it up to, as you say, God, the universe, whatever people identify with, to show me what that looks like. I've been doing a lot of travel, flying in, staying at hotels or at a cabin in a campground. So life's just looking very different for me over the last 6, 7 months. And so I'm embracing that.
Yeah. What was the surprisingly hardest thing about RV lifing, doing the RV tour?
It's the hardest thing. I for me, the hardest thing was dealing with Dan having medical issues because that puts everything else in perspective. Trying to dump the tanks and that hose coming apart. Everybody cringes. But in the scheme of things, it's not the worst thing in the world. Dealing with Dan had major medical issues. So that was the most challenging um, part of living the RV life.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. So it's going to be challenging no matter what. I think you told me he was entering dementia, something like that, right? Isn't that what it was? Or no? Or
Sort of. So he had been struggling with his health for about a year, probably the last year. And what we realized was he had had a couple of strokes. Um, and those strokes have left him cognitively impaired, sort of mirrors what somebody with dementia would be like. So he is severely cognitively impaired and actually is now in long-term care and has been for the last 6 months.
is it when you have an opportunity to be able to see him or go spend time with him, does he recognize you?
For the most part, yes. He doesn't remember that we're married or, his short-term memory struggles, but his long-term memory also struggles. It's very odd, and that's why, even the doctor said it's atypical of what you'd see in a dementia patient.
Mm.
And the brain is just very strange. And, the doctors, as they explain things, it doesn't, when somebody is ill and you're standing in a hospital and you're told that this person's not going to get better. And I can look and see that I'm not going to be able to care for this person. For me, I want to figure it out. I want a diagnosis. I want it to be very specific, very clear. And that just didn't happen. And it probably never will because understanding how the brain functions is just, there's a lot the medical community just does not know. And so I, again, sometimes you have to surrender to what is, for lack of a better term, and just be in acceptance. So, yeah, for the most part, he would recognize me. He did not remember if we were married. He would remember we were in an RV sometimes, sometimes not. It, 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 the strangest thing I've ever experienced, honestly.
The good news is he's forgotten all the reasons he was mad at you, and you have an opportunity to remind him all the reasons you're mad at him.
There's the silver lining. I never thought of it that way. Yes.
I,
I mean, I'll be honest here. It was frustrating because he didn't want to take care of his health, and that was frustrating. And I'm not saying that for anybody to think bad of him in any way, shape, or form. It's just, for me, I had to be able to let go of any guilt I might have or any responsibility that I had to feel. And that's a tough one. It's like being with somebody who's got an addiction and you're trying to get them to get clean. And I guess my sharing that is that anybody that's going through that, I did everything I can. I have to constantly be reminded of that. I have to constantly remind myself, thank God for the friends and the people that I'm surrounded by that has been so helpful and supportive. It's the only way that I got through this. Um, and for anybody out there, like there's just so much you could do. And if you're living a life that isn't your best life because of somebody you're with, that's not fair to you. And as hard as that might be, I would encourage people to, and I know we're going off there's not a set agenda here, but I would just encourage people to live their life, to say, well, I've been married. I mean, we've been together for 20 years, and to say we've been together for 20 years and I'm supposed to just stay in that. No, that's not what anybody is meant to do. Now, the decision was taken out of my hands because I couldn't have brought him home if I wanted to. So in some ways, I guess I got lucky. I didn't have to make an actual decision. Again, the silver lining a little bit, but yeah, I would encourage people. I know there are a lot of people I talk to and a lot of people that are out there that are just doing what they're doing because they feel like that's their destiny, what they're supposed to do. And, it goes back to regrets. When you're on your deathbed, what do you want? Because you can't go back and change it. It's got to be something that happens now.
Yeah. It's powerful. It's a powerful thought process. I think it's powerful to talk about. Do you mind if I ask you some more questions around that?
Go ahead.
Awesome. I think too, I'm just struck too by, as you were talking about it, I was thinking, what is the regret that I'm going to have, and take action towards that? Not what is the regret that I think you're going to have for me, or what is your regret? So I'm going to take my action based on what your regret is, because it can be different things for different people. So really being powerful and taking the time to go, all right, this is my direction. This is my destiny. This is going to be my regret. So this is the action that I'm going to take. Right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. It's when Dan started getting ill. And again, it's tough to share. And it's a tough process that I went through. When somebody said it might have been easier if he had had a heart attack and passed, that's how difficult, and not being cruel or whatever, but that's how difficult it was. What you're saying, we live, and I think moms, maybe more so than anybody else, lives in this, I've got to take care of my kids, and now I got to take care of my husband, I got to take care of this and that. And that's the belief. And I'm hoping over generations that's changing, and we live in that and we stay in it, and they're happy and we're miserable. What usually happens is no matter how hard we try to make everybody happy, nobody's happy and we're the ones that are blamed. And so to your point, what I want to do with my life and what I would think of as a regret is different than what other people want and see. That the book said the first regret in the book, the 5 top regrets of the dying, I've recommended for everybody to read. The first regret was to live as I wanted to, not as other people wanted me to. We do that all the time. We live the way other people think we should. And while making those changes might sound, oh, I'm making it sound easy to make those big changes. Look, the last 7 months have been some of the most grueling times of my life. I get on my podcast every week and I interview somebody and I show up the best that I could show up. But at the end of the day, behind closed doors, and I'm happy to share it, there was a lot of crying and yelling and painful conversations and, just wanting to give up in that.
Yeah.
But again, that idea of living my life fully and without regrets is what kept me going.
Yeah. The episode you're referring to as well, for anybody watching, listening, with Greg Benedict when he was on my podcast, is number 724, The Courage to Take Bold Action. And that book, The 5 Biggest Regrets, I can't remember the name of the book.
5 top regrets of the dying.
5 top regrets of the dying. And it inspired Greg to do a 100-day rejection challenge. where he'd go do these things and be willing to be rejected. And it's an awesome interview, and it's very inspiring. And so everybody should go listen to that, of course. That's a really cool thing you do on your podcast, by the way, the way you weave the storyline in between podcast episodes is amazing, and you do it so naturally.
Thank you.
Was that a natural thing from you, from your teaching story? No, go ahead.
No, and I'm laughing because when, again, I was a teacher and I wanted no parts of being in front of the camera. Dan was working, directing, producing. He was doing all kinds of things in the industry, and I was fine helping out behind the camera. Never wanted to get in front of the camera. And when I made that transition and I wanted to leave my job, going out and speaking and doing videos was what he kind of wanted me to do. And when I first started, literally we'd get on to do a video, or we'd be broadcasting, and I would have questions that I knew he was going to ask, and I would know how I was going to answer it. That's how I did it. And so over the years, he taught me the skills. And when we would do the podcast together, and people could go back and listen to those episodes of him and I together, I always deferred to him and, let him make the decisions. And over time, I think I developed my confidence. And then last March, when all of a sudden he couldn't do it anymore, it was sink or swim for me. I had to do it. And I will say, in the last 7 months that he's not been able to do the podcast, I have not missed one single week.
Wow.
Not one single week did I miss. I pushed myself. I made it work. I just am finding my own way and my own voice. And, it's the podcast now, still the same name, but it's morphing into a very different type of thing that's me and it's mine. And I'm grateful. I'm shocked sometimes to see what it's become, and that it is quote unquote successful. And yes, I have advertisers, and it's surreal to me sometimes. I'm blown away.
Yeah. And actually raising your prices for the advertisers and having people gladly being willing to pay. We'll dive into that in a minute, but I kind of want to close a couple loops. And so you're on the RV tour. You're out there for 3 years. Your husband's going through his cognitive decline, his physical decline. Today, is he still declining? I mean, is it on the downward slope? I hope it's okay me asking
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I feel like anything that I could share that could help somebody else, when we put ourselves out there, there's really not much privacy, and I'm happy to talk about it because I hope that it could help someone else. It's sort of like somebody that has dementia. So people have dementia, they could be kind of steady, and then all of a sudden you see a big decline because of what is going on for him. It's so atypical of dementia or being from a stroke. The number of strokes that he's had, nobody knows what that's going to look like. There's no time frame. There's no really understanding. They're keeping him comfortable and happy, and it's the best possible situation for what is going on for him. Could it be a sudden decline? It can. It's been pretty consistent over the last 7 months. So nobody knows what that's going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable like that. Because it's good, and that you're vulnerable. I appreciate it, is what I'm meaning to say. And it's a lot of people are aging where their parents are aging out, or however you want to say it. So this is a reality for a lot of people, what you're talking about. Both my parents died at the bottom, mom was 70, dad was 73, dad of a heart attack out of nowhere, was supposedly healthy as an ox, was out hiking in the mountains, had a heart attack. My mother got cancer and passed away. Um, but really functional until the end. My mother was like she was a fighter, and I say that in a good way, meaning
No,
that
yes.
she was up until the last week when she should have been in hospice. She was dragging Bob, her husband, to the grocery store. You know what I mean? And uh, but I got lucky in one hand where I didn't. Both my parents, in effect, had sudden deaths, where I didn't have to deal with sustained decline cognitively and or physically, and so I know people that have parents that are hitting their 90s and things like that, and I'm just like, wow, I got to skip all that. Blessing and a curse, blessing and a curse. I'm not saying one's
Exactly.
better than the
Oh,
other, but what I think is interesting is that you were going to have to deal with this situation whether you were on the road or not. So you happen to be on the road, and you're having to manage your husband's. You and your husband Dan are having to manage his health circumstances while you're on the road, and it's going to happen either way. So I'm curious, have you had time to reflect and be like, boy, what a gift that we got to deal with it on the road? Or oftentimes you're like, man, it sure would be nice to be at a fixed location.
well, so I'm so grateful of the time we were on the road. I'm so grateful for the people that we met, the connections, the friendships. It just I cannot explain it to somebody who's never done it. It's truly an amazing experience. And he was ill while we were in Florida, and the community. So the people in the campground came together and helped me because I was taking everything out of the RV, putting it in a U-Haul trailer to come back to Pennsylvania where family is, where we're from. And the community was amazing. But not only that, because we had connections with industry leaders, presidents of companies that we truly had real connections, real friendships with. And they were calling and reaching out, what could we do to help? And they truly meant it. Like what I talked to somebody who's actually one of my advertisers, but the owner of a company, and he was in tears. Like that's a kind of connection. And he truly meant, what could we do to help? And so being on the road, because we were able to drive Dan back safely, I had a friend that brought us back. One of the things that I see that happens with people, they don't have necessarily that resource. And that's one of the things that I am very committed to putting out there. People who are traveling. I had a friend just a couple of days ago said her friend had to be airlifted out of Zion National Park and was in the ICU in pretty serious condition. I want people to have a plan of what to do when you're on the road and you're ill. So if I had said, let me just get Dan on an airplane and bring him back myself, it could have been catastrophic. Like, could have been a really seriously bad situation. I have a good friend that actually has a company. It's called Flying Angels, and that is something they do. They will take somebody from one area of the world to another with a certified nurse on a commercial airline, so it makes it less expensive. And I see so many people out there that have dealt with illness or injuries and problems. I know of a couple that was told because they had insurance, the insurance company just sent them on a commercial airline, the couple, and the wife, I think, was ill, and the husband had to take care of her. And it never should have happened because he wrote this long letter, this long post that said, the flight got canceled or delayed. And when he called that insurance company, they said, that's an airline problem, not a insurance issue. So there are too many people that have major medical issues that are stable and need to get back to wherever home base is. And they don't have the right answer. So I want to make sure, again, my situation could have been catastrophic had I just said, let me just take Dan on an airplane, bring him back, and everything will be fine. No, there needed to be somebody medical with us if that was the route we were going to go. So in this, I think there's a lot of information and help and good that could come out of it. It's not about living in fear. So people that get on the road, people go hiking, people who are in Zion National Park doing whatever that guy was doing. It's not about living in fear, but being prepared. And I think that's a big thing, as we go out. And I mean, I went up at the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta and went on a hot air balloon. You have to have some backup plan, I guess. Live your life, do the stuff, have fun, but have a plan.
Amazing. In 30 seconds or less, the biggest misconception you had about the RV life?
That it was going to be less money, that it was going to cost less than it did.
Amazing. What, again, in 30 seconds or less, the surprisingly biggest, wow, this is amazing, part of the RV life?
It was the places and people that I met that aren't the national parks and the big thing. It was the smaller towns, the little farm that had longhorn cattle that I got to pet. It was those things that were more wow and exciting.
Yeah. Anybody that's thinking about the RV life, whether it's a van, the big 40-footers or the mid-size Sprinter van, what's the number one thing you would tell them? 30 seconds or less. Someone's like, hey, I'm getting this van. I need to know.
Wow.
What is it?
First of all, they need to know about how to drive that thing safely and where to drive it safely. RV Life, the reason I connected with them, they have RV Safe GPS, and anybody that's in anything other than a minivan needs to have an RV Safe GPS.
Cool, great.
It's an absolute.
It's a good tip. And we're going to get to your podcasting expertise here in a minute. But I kind of want to close a couple loops in regards to your husband. And this is going to be a sensitive question, I believe, so bear with me. As far as your husband, Dan, you said Dan didn't really want to take care of his health. Do you think he'd given up to a certain extent? So it was almost like a low-grade suicide wish, or he's like, well, I'm tired, I'm done, or does that question make sense? Or
that question totally makes sense. And being totally transparent, he had a lot of things that were weighing on him. He had a lot, and I think a lot of people do. And again, I've been saying I'd like to put this out there because I think it's so important for people to hear. There was a lot of childhood trauma that came up. There was a lot of things that he was concerned about and worried about and didn't express. He bottled a lot up inside. And to some degree, yes, I think that this was a checking out sort of thing. I can't know that for sure. I don't want people to feel like I'm judging. I'm not. It was stuff that even within his health and his mental health and well-being that I really tried to support him and get him to help himself. And I do think, yes, that was a part of it.
I think a lot of us get tired. I think a lot of us get tired as we get older towards the end. And go ahead.
I'm going to say what I've seen is, and I worked as a high school teacher. I mentor kids more than I did teach. And I love that part of it. I think our young people are suffering as well. And maybe we could say that some of it was because of COVID and what people lived through, pressures of what goes on. I think there's so many more mental health concerns that people aren't talking about, don't know about. And I would like to find a way to talk about it, get it out there more. The person who's acting out, yelling, screaming, or going out getting drunk or doing drugs, you see them reacting outwardly. The person that's quietly sitting back, not saying anything, they're the people I worry more about. And I have a friend that had a mental breakdown, needed to go to a hospital, and people that knew him kept saying, "Oh, I never would have expected that of him." And that's where I think there's so much of this, so many people suffering and struggling, and we need more help. And it's not a, "Oh, I'm suicidal and here's the number to call." I think we need more help and support for people of all ages.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. I think with the proliferation of social media and the look good and the shininess of things, that on one hand, it's awesome because there's new avenues of communication, new resources to have easy access to. But on the other side of the thing, at least in Western culture, we can set up some really unrealistic expectations of how we're supposed to look to the outside world, what we think people, how they're supposed to see us thinking, feeling, all those sorts of things. So it's interesting. I feel blessed to be willing to express my emotions and talk openly and vulnerable and actually have these kinds of conversations and be
And I
willing to
think these
ask.
are great. Yeah. And I think in the world of, talking about podcasting and social media, there's this big shiny object, like they're doing it and everything's perfect. And I wouldn't want, like on my podcast, and I hope I'm sharing it enough for anybody to think day to day, everything's perfect and working great. No, there are days I have to force myself to get up out of bed and get the podcast interview done. And I think these kind of conversations, like your show and the being real, and I'm glad you're asking these questions because I do want people to know this isn't all pretty and everything's great. And all of a sudden I started a podcast and I'm making money and everything just went awesome and there's no issues. Um, it just doesn't work that way.
Well, absolutely. And there's plenty of courses and coaches and influencers out there that sell us that it's easy. Just hit start, follow these simple steps, and you'll be monetizing before you know it.
Right.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole necessarily. We'll save that for interview number two. What
Okay.
I do, I have one final question in regards to your husband, and it's more of an existential question, I think. The soul, uh, your reincarnation, your husband changing, to have a frontline experience with that, have your perceptions changed? Do you meditate on that? Do you contemplate on that?
I I do a lot of meditating. I journal. I've um, spiritual, whatever you want to, however people want to call it. With what is going on with him, again, it's made me say life is short. He turned 65 when this happened. Not like he's all that old, yeah. And I'm younger than him. So it happened at an age that you don't expect it. Um, I have meditated, I have contemplated, I have talked to my mentors and my coaches and cried my eyes out. And it's now a time, and that's what I've done over the last several months of surrender. There's, it's all out of my hands now. What happens with him and, you know, how he progresses is all out of my hands. There's nothing different I could do. There's
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. And thank you for answering the question. Let's move on, talk about your podcast. When you and Dan started the RV Life podcast, it's now grown. Um, did you have, when you started the RV Life podcast, did you have an idea on how to grow downloads, on how you wanted to grow it, on how you wanted to promote it?
There was the idea that, again, we wanted to be authentic. We wanted to provide. So the RV Life podcast was created to entertain, educate, and explore the RV lifestyle with the mission to inspire people. And so I went into it with that. And again, here we go, looking at numbers, concern. And I said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to go into it. We're going to do the best we can. RV Life Pro, the company, was obviously part of it. And I just let go of it. And honestly, in less than 2 months, we got a notification that said we were in the top 10% of all podcasts worldwide. And I was in total disbelief. Like, I checked the statistics 10 times. And then a month later, we were in the top 5%, a month after that, of all podcasts worldwide. So I was blown away. And what it meant for me was the podcast was another platform to inspire people. And what it meant for me seeing those numbers was that I was getting my messaging out there. That's all I cared about. So now, because I've had the YouTube channel, I have the podcast, I've been on stages, I want to get on stages to accomplish that, to inspire people, to do what I love, to do what I'm passionate about. And that's what it meant. And I will say that our podcast did grow rather quickly. And the big thing is, and you could probably attest to it, you got to be consistent. You've got to be committed to it and be consistent, but that shouldn't drive you crazy. It shouldn't make you nuts doing it, because if that's the case, then you're not enjoying it. So I'm just very humbled by the numbers I see and grateful, and the connections I've made with advertisers have just loved what is happening. And I worried 6, 7 months ago, when it was just me, if I would lose advertisers, if I'd lose, numbers, the people. And thankfully I haven't. And I'm grateful, because I can hopefully inspire people like Brittany that reached out and said, I love what you're saying. You've really inspired me to want to get on the road. That's the goal.
Amazing. And one last question. Well, the last question before the last question. So you have 4 advertisers right now, I believe, 4 core advertisers who are paying
Yep.
you. 5.
5. Mhm.
Did you actively go out and pursue those sponsorships, or did they organically come to you?
There were some that organically came to me. I actually, going into 2025, as you said, I raised my rates, and I had people on a waiting list. I'm happy to say. And I'm just, again, it's surreal for me. But there are people on a waiting list that want to come in, and I don't want to do too many ads in an hour podcast. So we'll see how that plays out for January.
Amazing. I think what's really cool is you have got advertisers outside of the traditional podcast networks. A lot of people are selling access to a podcast network that has advertisers. Boom, 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 boom. These networks are finding advertisers for you. So anybody that has a podcast that's outside of the network, those networks, what would you say are the top 3 tips about getting advertisers for your podcast?
So for me, it was all about the connections I made to these companies. So these companies knew, liked, and trusted us, because we were all about honesty, being authentic. And that was the big thing. We made real connections with companies. I mean, on the podcast, I've had presidents and CEOs that, I have on my cell phone, because of the connection that was made. It wasn't about reading a script and calling and acting all business-like. As soon as, I'll get on a call with somebody. I have a call tomorrow with the owner of a large RV dealership, and we just talk. I talk to him the same way I talked to the person that was next to me in the campground. And I think that's what has worked well for me.
Amazing. Um, what was I just had this amazing question, and it escaped me. So this is the next to last question before the last question. Um, oh, You said something very interesting in some of our previous conversations. You said two things that you tell your advertisers. One, my actual download numbers don't matter, so I'm not going to tell them to you. You might not say it exactly like that,
Yeah.
but so A, you're not the advertisers, you're not giving them the download numbers. You're like, it kind of doesn't matter. And B, this is creating exposure for you. So if you are looking for brand elevation, that's why you're talking to me. It's not necessarily about selling that next individual thing because somebody clicks on a call to action.
Right. That's exactly right. So when somebody says, what's your download number? I explain to them that that's not going to mean anything. What do they have to compare it to? Now, if somebody came back to me and said, I talked to 3 other podcasts and this is their download, that's never happened. But so I try and educate them on the difference between the information you get from a podcast and the information from, say, a YouTube channel that anybody and everybody can see the details. And maybe that's right, wrong. I'm not a numbers person. Again, I'm just trying to authentically say it the way that I talk about it. And to your point, the numbers aren't necessarily, I'm not looking to say you're going to sell this many in this much time being an advertiser on the podcast. That said, I do have an advertiser on the podcast that is doing very well because of the exposure on the podcast. It is hard to track back, but, he is very happy with the exposure he's gotten. And it's mostly through the podcast because when I talked to him in the beginning, he said, we're the best kept secret in the RV world. And obviously you don't want to keep your product a secret. And so the product has gone through the roof. So,
Awesome. Yeah, good, good. Thank you for answering that question. I think this is a great place to stop. I want to be cognizant of time. Before I hit stop, is there anything that you want to say where you feel like, oh, I wished I'd have said, or you'd be regretful that you didn't have a chance to say?
I just want to reiterate that people, first of all, should read the book, The 5 Top Regrets of the Dying, and just do at least one thing that's for themselves. Living their life fully can be that one small step. So that would be the big thing I would hope people get out of this interview.
Amazing. I'm going to hit stop, Patty, and we'll say a quick goodbye offline. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.